from Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Ahead today on this week's Cattle Market segment, Katelyn McCullock of the Livestock Marketing Information Center. Katelyn will discuss the latest demand numbers for beef and for competing meats, and she'll share the latest LMIC report on hay price trends. Then K-State's K C Olson will provide an update on his ongoing research into late-season pasture burning and the impacts on sericea lespedeza control and cattle gain performance. He says that the numbers are looking quite good on both counts. Also a preview of the upcoming Fall Forestry Field Day from Ashley Belt of the Kansas Forest Service here at K-State. And Jeff Wickman awaits with this week's 4-H segment. All of that right here on Agriculture Today. Thanks for tuning in once more for this Agriculture Today. As customary on a Monday, we open up with a look at the cattle markets. Lending some insight on what's happening there, Katelyn McCullock, the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, from her office out in Denver. And simply put, Katelyn, last week was a very tough one in the futures for fed and feeder cattle.
Yes, so we saw some pretty aggressive declines across the livestock complex. On the fed cattle, we had several weeks where we saw day-over-day changes going down, but most of the feeder cattle auction was later in the week, reacting to what I perceived to be some of that slip in the more deferred contracts in the fed cattle side. And then also there was a crop production report on that Friday. Now, one of the key time frames I like to look at is that April and June contract. So we've seen it peak around 142 in April, and now it closed on Friday close to 135. So some pretty big moves in the near term. And then June ended closer to 130. So a significant erosion on the fed cattle side. On the feeder cattle, they jumped around a little bit more. And I think October was close to 157 on Friday, but still quite a bit far off from where the peak was earlier this summer. Now, the feeder cattle market on the futures board has been a little bit interesting because it's really continued to stay very high despite what corn prices were doing earlier this summer. And some of that, I think, is related to what they could hedge on the fed cattle side. So now that we've seen that fed cattle market break a little bit, you're going to see some weakness in the feeder cattle market. But overall, the crop production number that came out was relatively supportive of feeder cattle prices. So I would expect those to kind of settle out over the next week and not anticipate a lot of big changes this week.
Boxed beef trade, you say it finished in a struggling manner last week, too.
So last week, day over day, it seemed to ease down through the week. And then Friday had a fairly big drop, down about $5 from Thursday, 100 weight. So that's a pretty big change on the boxed beef front. But boxed beef values are still above $300 a hundredweight on the choice side, and about $293 on the select side. So still very strong prices by historical perspectives, but we are seeing those numbers start to decline. Now, normally we would expect a little seasonal weakness. It might be happening a little later than we normally would anticipate, but I think that's helping drive that futures price on the fed cattle side. Now, it's important to keep in mind, we haven't seen the live cattle catch trade adjust quite the same way. That has been very firm last week. It was still about 125 for steers. And so we're looking at all those things on the feeder cattle side. Cash prices did dip. In western Kansas, we lost over $10 a hundredweight on the 6 to 7 weights and about $9 a hundredweight on the 7 to 8s. And that's week over week. So fairly big changes on the cash side there. But you're also coming into that time of year where we'd expect higher volumes in all of these auction markets. You might be getting a little bit of drought pressure from the lighter weight animals. We haven't quite seen the same change. 5 to 6s were actually up last week from the prior week. So still sorting out some of those details as well.
But to follow up on this pullback in boxed beef prices, you say we're actually seeing price declines across the meat complex, and that's notable.
On the meat side, it's maybe a little more troubling because of what we've seen on the pork complex. Right. Pork cuts and pork cutout have been declining more broadly across several weeks. And we've seen really sharp adjustments in some of those cuts. But on the beef side, it's really only been over the last week or so that we've seen any change. And some of the meat cuts haven't really changed. So ribeyes slowed their pace of increase as opposed to decline 2 weeks ago. And some others have had some very minor changes, whereas on the wholesale ham price, you've been declining for probably the better part of 6 to 8 weeks. And on the bellies, you're probably looking at the last 5 or 6 weeks having consecutive declines on the pork side. But as we know, beef doesn't operate in a vacuum. And so some of these competing meats are going to play a role, especially at the retail level, competing for consumer interest. Chicken prices remain really stable. Lamb prices continue to just remain very close to record highs. And last week, we saw a very big decline in slaughter on the sheep and lamb side. That single week was below any of even what the pandemic levels were. So a very big change from a holiday perspective, and probably a little bit bigger than we would have guessed even for a holiday week.
On the demand front, once again, what's the latest on international beef trade and our exports? There are new monthly numbers in, are there not?
So monthly trade released the July numbers right after Labor Day on a carcass weight basis, and it showed some interesting trends. So the big one I would say is that imports continue to be quite a bit below a year ago. So they're down 19% below July of 2020. And broadly, they're down across several of our major countries that export to the U.S., but Brazil remains up 14%. Nicaragua is about double what they did last July, and Canada was up about 9%. Now, on the beef and veal exports, that number has continued to impress. It was up 18% year over year in July, so another solid number. And this continues to put us on pace for record high beef exports in 2021. Now, the question is, how big will they be? So we're working with that big of a scale at this point to say that they are very likely going to be record high, but we don't know necessarily how big they're going to be. So the big story continues to be China, which is roughly 8 times what they purchased last July. And that's largely what's driving this. We did see a solid increase from Mexico, up about 33%, but most of the other destinations were down specifically for the month of July, but many of them have recovered on a year-to-date basis over what 2020 has been.
You at the LMIC are tracking, and appropriately so, given the drought conditions we see in so many parts of the country, what's going on with the hay market. And this becomes of greater and greater interest as we ease our way out of summer and into fall, and very soon see cattle producers turning to those hay and forage resources more routinely. What's the latest on that?
So USDA put out a weighted average price for July 2 weeks ago, and you'll get August in a few weeks. Nationally, alfalfa prices hit over $200 a ton, which is important because of where we are in the marketing year. And there is not going to be a substantial amount of hay brought in and being able to decrease that price probably from here on out. And so we have a season average price now that's going to be over $200 a ton and very close to $200 a ton next year. And part of it is just based on the high prices across competing crops. You're not going to be able to get a huge acreage boost. And even if you return to normal yields, we just don't see that production number providing that much relief next year, particularly when you think of the backdrop of having another possible La Niña winter. That might offer some moisture across the western parts, but typically you would see some dryness in the U.S. Now, the intensity of that is still largely unknown, but it's something we're factoring in as we look at what we think forage and hay prices will do throughout the year. On the other hay side, those jumped almost $10 a ton for other hay, and they're over $150 now. That was kind of a surprise to us. We thought they'd stay maybe in that $140 to $150 range, but that was a very big jump that just happened in July. And we'll be watching to see what it does here in late summer. Again, you're looking at the time of year when normally we would see hay prices start to increase. You might see a little bit of a decline in September, but basically from there on out, hay prices typically climb in this seasonal sense of things. And so we're expecting other hay prices also to remain quite high into 22-23 marketing year, as well as throughout the rest of this year. And we probably have a season average price for other hay nationally close to that 150, maybe a little bit under. But something to definitely watch. I know availability has been a big problem for producers, so it's not just that it's expensive, it's that you can't find it. And that's very regional depending on where you are, and even smaller areas than just regional, right? When we think of regions, we think of fairly large areas, but you're not trying to truck hay usually over such distances, particularly when gas and diesel prices are where they're at. So all of that is factoring into this hay market, and it's just going to be a very tough hay price situation for livestock producers for both the rest of this year and next year, probably.
One does wonder how much of a strain this is going to put on producers' costs of production, whatever level, cow-calf, backgrounder, finisher, a factor that could be quite influential, it seems, Katelyn.
The good news is we do have higher feeder and calf prices penciled out for the next 2 years as well. And so hopefully that'll provide some relief from that standpoint. I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here in terms of good and bad for the cattle sector, but you're in a cyclical downturn, and tighter supplies should mean better prices across every level of those live animal components. But the feed sector is still going to be very tough on the forage side. It seems like corn might come down, but it's not going to be returning to levels. It's not going to have a 3 in front of it, let's put it that way, probably for the near to medium future. You're probably looking at corn well into the 4s, if not 5s.
Well, this is the kind of information that they routinely monitor and comment upon on the lmic.info website. So producers, we'd invite you to take full advantage of what they have to share there, lmic.info. As always, Katelyn, thanks for your time and for the input, and we'll catch up again quite soon.
Thank you.
The director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Katelyn McCullock. That center, once again, is co-sponsored by K-State and numerous other land-grant universities. We'll be back on This Agriculture Today. Welcome back. You're listening to Agriculture Today. And the latest for you cattle producers who've an interest in this concept that we've referred to in the past, and it continues to be studied here at Kansas State University, late season pasture burning for an express weed control purpose and possibly some other benefits as well. Joining us once more is range management scientist at Kansas State University, K C Olson. Casey, you embarked on this work several years back now, but the inspiration here behind burning native pastures, not in the spring, as is traditional, but in the late fall, what got you thinking in this direction, to remind us?
A lack of other options, frankly. So I got interested in the sericea lespedeza problem almost as soon as I got to Kansas State University, a faculty member. It's an intriguing problem, and for your listeners, I was trained as a nutritionist, and I went after the problem like a nutritionist would. I found out what it was about sericea lespedeza that made it objectionable for beef cattle to select as they were grazing. It's a compound called condensed tannin, and I thought, well, maybe if I can neutralize the effect of the tannin in the gut, that our beef cattle will eat more of it, and we can get control that way. That worked. Okay, but it didn't produce a level of defoliation that could be equated with control. We started thinking a little more about, what if we brought a more tannin-tolerant ruminant into our beef cattle grazing system to provide that heavy level of defoliation? So we co-grazed goats with cows. That worked really well. It turns out, though, that goats need about a $25,000 a mile fence to keep them at home.
Right.
Producers weren't very interested in that idea. So there I was. Okay, I was out of options.
A lot of ideas, but none that
would
stick. Yeah.
I started thinking, back to my range training and my master's degree, with the really basic notion that if you can stress a plant at a time when it's physiologically vulnerable, maybe you'll get some control. And I should add to this that I was not personally very satisfied with control that I was getting with herbicide. Okay, I had to use it every year. I had plants coming back in the same places every year. And I could see the collateral damage that herbicide was causing. Okay, I was seeing some of the ephemeral forbs that fix nitrogen, and that, the wildflowers that attract native insects and native game, those things were leaving. So what if, was the question I asked myself, what if we took the prescribed fire culture that we're used to in the Flint Hills that sort of says, April's really the only time we can do it? what if we move that fire, to a time after our steers would have vacated the prairie or after, cows would have moved on to a different location. And in our first study, which we began in 2014, we tested basically 3 burn times, April, August, and September. We ran that for 4 years in a non-grazed ecosystem. Number one, we got beautiful and almost instantaneous control of sericea lespedeza, first with seed, and then over subsequent years with actually sort of rooting out some of those mature plants. We didn't cause any damage to the native prairie in terms of biomass production or grass cover or even really the mixture of those forage grasses. We got something we didn't expect. The plants that are probably the most sensitive to a sericea lespedeza invasion are our native legumes and our native wildflowers, the ones that bear nectar for our native fauna. Those things really proliferated under those alternative fire regimes. In fact, in our August treatment, they doubled, and in our September burn treatment, they tripled. And folks, that we invited out to that research site, after 2 treatments and 3 growing seasons, they could visually detect differences between our fire treatments. There was obviously some skepticism in the scientific community and the ranching community. So what we needed to do was move that concept to a commercial scale. We needed to add grazing in a controlled way and figure out, in a grazed ecosystem, can we still get all the benefits of sericea control? Can we still get all the benefits of those slight shifts in plant population and not ruin ourselves economically by damaging livestock performance?
Because that was a critical measure to assure that did not happen, no impediments to gains.
And we were frankly anticipating that there would be some impediments to gain because, we've got a 60-some year history in the Flint Hills of April fire followed by intensive early season grazing by yearlings. And we know that when we burn, we can expect 20 to 30 extra pounds of body weight compared to when we don't burn. And there's been some season of fire evaluation in the past, but actually those dates were either winter or extreme early spring fires compared with that sort of mid-spring fire. Nobody looked into effects on performance with either a summertime prescribed burn or an early fall prescribed burn. So we're now in our 4th year of that research. We have 4 years of plant data and 3 complete years of livestock performance data, totaling between 12 and 1,400 head. And we now have some very good news to report. So in a grazed ecosystem, the positive responses in the plant community are still there. So we have no detectable sericea lespedeza in watersheds that were burned in late summer or early fall. The only place it's still around is in spring burn watersheds. And we still got a nice response from that ephemeral forb community. And we have not seen any major disturbances in the forage grass community, namely big and little bluestem, Indian grass, and Cytos grama. We're still a little suspicious that early fall fire may be hard on Indian grass, and we're going to continue to monitor that. Okay, but here's the real shocker. We assumed that we were going to give up some livestock performance with those alternative fire dates. And after 3 years and all the yearling cattle weights, the cattle that graze an April burned area gained the same amount of weight as the cattle that grazed a summer burned area. There was no difference in those animals' performance. However, with the true fall burn treatment, this is an early October average date, those cattle gave back about 20 pounds compared to those that grazed a summer burned area and those that grazed a fall burn area. So obviously extremely encouraging for Kansas producers. We shared this at a field day just recently at the Gun Barrel Ranch. At that location, they've been on a regular application of summer fire since 2016, and it shows. A beautiful piece of the Flint Hills that used to have just a really heartbreaking problem with sericea lespedeza no longer has a problem. My favorite quote from the landowner is, "I used to spend about the same amount of money on chemical, on herbicide, as I did on my property taxes. Now I'm just buying it by the bottle. And it takes me a year or two to get through that bottle. So, wonderful, wonderful news.
Something you say, though, Casey, that you want to explore further here is the practicality of burning every late summer. And, in fact, you suggest that a different interval might be appropriate here. Explain.
Well, we're going to adjust our methods moving forward. I had this discussion with Dr. Dale Blasi just last week, and it's troubling to me that when we talk to producers out there in the Flint Hills or the Osage Hills, they're not using the approach that we've suggested to the letter. Burning every August can be a real challenge. Burning every late September, early October can be a real challenge. You wind up having a great fire one year, and the next year it's kind of a fizzle. It just doesn't carry to any great degree. So moving forward, we are going to go to that every other year approach with our August prescribed fire and our early October prescribed fire, where this year we're going to defer it. We'll come back in 2022 and repeat it. And at this point, we're going to continue to burn annually in April, just so this is as tough a comparison as we can make it. What our friends in the field are telling us, when they use prescribed fire every other August or every other September, they're getting the same, possibly even better control over sericea lespedeza. They're still getting the same benefits in the plant community. Their fires are easier to carry, and many report that they believe their wildlife habitat has substantially increased with sort of a mixture of fire regimes. So the areas that are 2 years since fire tend to be highly favored for nesting.
Well, Casey, in the last few years, you've amassed considerable information on how late-season pasture burning may pay off definitely in sericea lespedeza control and some ancillary benefits to go with it. And you've been good to avail yourself to any landowner inquisitive about this, and you continue to be so.
Absolutely. Folks, if you want to email me or call me, I welcome that interaction. I always get asked if we have a website or if I have a website. I don't. I'm not that tech-savvy person. But I'm always glad to help and to provide information.
Great work. Thanks, Casey, for bringing us up to speed on it right here.
Always a pleasure, Eric.
Animal scientist who specializes in range cattle nutrition and management, K C Olson, with us on Agriculture Today, briefing us on his ongoing work on the benefits of prescribed burns for native pasture late in the growing season, that being in the August through September time period. We'll return with more. You're listening to Agriculture Today. We're back now on this Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Time aside here to fill you in on an important event every year for those interested in managing their tree resources for whatever purposes. The annual Fall Forestry Field Day will be hosted by K-State and the Kansas Forest Service in mid-October. And filling us in on the goings-on at this field day, Ashley Belt, District Forester in Southeast Kansas for the Kansas Forest Service. First, about the event in general, Ashley. This is the 26th annual informational event, right?
Correct. And I think this year is really important because we didn't get to have it last year due to COVID, and COVID is still around, but we're going to be outside, and it's going to hopefully be lovely weather, so people can come in and enjoy it, and we're going to have a hog roast. That'll be new. So the 26th annual will have a hog roast.
It'll be an excellent event all the way around. It's happening in your backyard, so to speak, in Southeast Kansas. Tell about the venue, if you would.
Yes, it's going to be on River Farms, the Camburn family, and that land's been owned by the Camburn family for generations. They've been a member of the Kansas Tree Farm for 32 years now. They are ranchers, they are farmers, and they have about 200 acres of trees.
Wow.
And I've been working for 5 years down there, and we've planted 1,500 tree seedlings. We've done about 40 acres of TSI, which is timber stand improvement. And I've been a part of some tree plantings that have unfortunately failed due to flooding because they're right along the Neosho River, and sometimes the levee gives way. And they also have pecan trees that Ted himself has started all of them in foam cups in the backyard of his house. And so now they're about 20 feet tall and producing each year. And that'll be hopefully a part of the field day as well.
So the purposes of their tree resources are twofold, for timber as well as pecan protection?
For sure, yes. And wildlife. We're going to have Logan Martin. He is the area biologist out of Pittsburgh. He will be there and talk about the importance of wildlife and timber and management, all inclusive. So just managing the property itself for the timber and also wildlife is their goal.
And there'll be contributions on several other subjects, invasive plants, invasive pests. Those will be discussed?
Yes, Ryan will come and he will talk about the emerald ash borer. He's actually trapped a tree, and so he'll go back to it and we'll talk about the emerald ash borer and invasive plants. Also, Charlie Barden will be there and we'll talk about tree plantings and the importance of tree tubes and how to manage and take care of trees. There will be a sawmill also demonstration as well. And like I said, the pecans, we'll go through the pecans and look at the different varieties, and they may even do a picking for us.
So it'll have all kinds of different facets to it. And for whom do you envision this field day? Landowners, obviously, but those who would like to develop their tree resources further? What?
All of them, to get more knowledge on how to manage timber, what is managing timber in general, and why. Why would I manage timber? A lot of times, especially in the Southeast, trees are just there. It's kind of like your junk drawer. You know it's there. You know what you need if you need it. So why is it important for landowners to take time out to manage their timber, and how can they benefit from managing their timber?
Year in and year out, this is an outstanding program for anybody with any level of interest in tree management for whatever purpose. And this year's event will take place again in southeast Kansas near Erie, just to the south and west of that community, right?
That's correct. Yep, you just go about 2 miles south of Erie, right on Highway 59. You will cross the Neosho River. If you look to the west, you'll see a big yellow barn, and then you know you're there. And that yellow barn will also be a part of the field day. Ted himself is going to talk about the history of the barn, and it's a well-known site that a lot of people in the southeast Kansas know about. There's been lots of pictures taken, and so we're very grateful that he's allowing us to look through it.
Again, it's at River Farms. Ted Camburn and his family will be hosting it on the 13th of October. That is a Wednesday. You are taking registrations, a very slight fee to cover the meal and so forth, right?
Yes, $12, and we do registration even at the field day itself. So up until then, and even the day of, you can show up, and we'll be grateful to have you, and it'll hopefully be good weather. But
if folks can register in advance, that would be helpful.
For sure,
as well.
Yes, it would be helpful. Give us an idea of count and how many people to expect.
And you can do that by visiting the Kansas Forest Service website, where you'll find a link to the field day, all the details, kansasforests.org. Once more, it's the Fall Forestry Field Day, hosted by the Service and Kansas State University on Wednesday, October the 13th, River Farms in Neosho County, not far from Erie. Hope you can take it in. And good luck with pulling it off, Ashley. Thank you for the preview right here.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
She's Ashley Belt, Southeast Kansas District Forester for the Kansas Forest Service. The 26th Annual Fall Forestry Field Day, October 13th, kansasforests.org to reserve your place for this event. And while we've a moment to slip in another reminder about an event that's coming up even sooner, Thursday, September the 30th, to be exact, the 2021 K-State Beef Stalker Field Day. As those of you who have attended this in the past can attest, this is an outstanding program each year. On the docket this time around, the results of the new National Stalker Survey, also a panel of National Beef Stalker Award recipients, including 2 producers from Kansas. We'll discuss what's worked for them and what they see in the future of stalker and backgrounder production. Of course, there'll be that fine brisket lunch on site. And in the afternoon, K-State's Glenn Tonzer with his beef cattle outlook. From Huva Pharma, Joe Dedrickson will talk about managing BRD and coccidiosis effectively through receiving rations. And from West Texas A&M University, John Richardson on a novel approach to starting newly arrived calves on feed. And to round out the program, K-State's A.J. Tarpoff with a comparison of processing methods for stocker cattle. The $25 registration covers everything, but you have to have that taken care of no later than this coming Wednesday, September the 15th. To do so, go to ksubeef.org. All the details and registration can be found right there. ksubeef.org. The K-State Beef Stocker Field Day at the Stocker Unit north and west of Manhattan, Thursday, September the 30th. Hope to see you there. Again, pre-registration due this Wednesday. You are tuned in to Agriculture Today. After this final break, Jeff Wickman takes the reins with this week's 4-H feature for you. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. In its effort to create positive public discussion, Kansas 4-H continues to facilitate community conversations through its 4-H Community Vitality Team. The goal is to educate others about ways to approach difficult issues. Jackie Hernandez, a K-State freshman, is project coordinator for the team, and Chase Jordan, a K-State junior, is the assistant project coordinator. Chase, first off, maybe just some background on the 4-H Vitality Community Team and Project. What is that all about?
Yeah, so the Community Vitality Team, we've kind of done a little rebranding. We used to be called the Stories Matter Team, and for good reason. Our program is really all about connecting with youth and allowing them to share their stories and experiences in a safe environment that they feel comfortable in.
Run through some of the programs then. What does the team offer?
So we'll start off with visual thinking strategies. This is a really easy one to kind of get students into thinking critically about a piece of artwork or anything like that. It's developed by our partner, the Mariana Kistler Beach Museum, in conjunction with K-State Research and Extension, and it's really a nice team-building exercise. It's a great icebreaker, too, getting students to kind of just really think critically about a piece of art or any illustration and to share their opinions in a way that makes them feel safe.
Jackie, maybe something about the Conversation Boot Camp. What's that all about?
So the Conversation Boot Camp is a 2 to 3 hour session that arms youth with the baseline knowledge for handling difficult conversations, and it kind of helps the youth understand what community conversations are all about. We have a PowerPoint that goes through it and allows the youth to see what it's all about.
It's great for establishing really baseline knowledge on topics such as empathy, critical communication styles, conflict styles.
Another of the programs is ICDD Facilitator Training. So first off, what does ICDD stand for?
The Institute of Civic Discourse and Democracy.
So ICDD is a very integral part of our program. They help us develop a lot of our materials related to deliberation and dialogue. We get their principles of civic discourse from them. It allows students to really connect with ground rules that we can have them remind each other throughout the community conversation series. Being respectful, allowing for time limits to be respected, and sharing in an environment they feel safe in, and how to create that space.
Trying to make sure that everyone is comfortable and everybody knows the rules and this is how we proceed. And that makes the conversation stay on track, right?
Yes, of course. Keeping it on track. We like to keep it around one central topic usually. But, of course, if they'd like to share something that they feel is related to the discussion, they're more than welcome to do that as well.
So then the next program would be Community Conversations, so that is then taking it out to the community?
Yes. Community Conversations is the highlight of any of our summits that we have hosted in the past. So this is around a 4-hour session that we host around some central topic, including mental health, perhaps economic issues, agricultural-related issues. I know some of our issue guides through the National Issues Forum addressed agricultural issues concerning the Midwest, specifically Kansas, and how to address that kind of market. But, of course, there are a lot of different issues as well concerning social issues, as well as civic engagement in general, which is what we're all about. We're part of the Civic Engagement Project, so allowing for a space to them to share on topics they may not know a lot about, but still are able to connect to in some way is really the focus of this program.
So this is with leaders then, or is this led by 4-H youth? How do the community conversations, I guess, get started? What's the setup?
So for the community conversations, when they get started, we reach out to the extension agents and then offer them if they want to do a community conversation. And it usually happens with a group of youth that want to be facilitators, and then we'll train them 2 weeks before for at least an hour and a half session. Then they learn how to become facilitators. And then with that, they'll be able to facilitate at the event that they want to host. And we'll go and we'll be there to help in whatever they need.
So a lot of support with this.
Yes, lots of support. We try to give them as many resources as possible to get them prepared for the eventual event. So like Jackie said, 2 weeks before, we'll go ahead and get them trained, or at the very least, get them acquainted with the structure, so that when the time comes, they'll be able to host those conversations in the most productive manner they can.
The final program is the Leadership Summit. What happens there?
The Leadership Summit is a new program that we are offering for extension agents, and as well as really any local community organization. It allows them to take parts of our program that we have just discussed, like visual thinking strategies, training, conversation boot camp, and really personalize the experience to what they are hoping to accomplish. So that would include maybe doing a VTS, visual thinking strategies session, maybe doing some conversation boot camp later in the day, and we like to incorporate some team building exercises that the extension agents produce to keep the youth engaged. They'll sometimes offer them lunch and all that jazz, so they'll be able to really have a great time.
So what are some of the benefits then that youth gain from going through this experience?
I think something that they'll take away from this experience and benefit from is like their leadership style. They'll definitely feel more comfortable.
Yeah, they really get to personalize their own style. They get to find it and really explore how they want to approach difficult conversations. And through these trainings, it really gets them to share in ways that they really didn't expect before. Because a lot of times in today's day and age, it's very, debate-centered. Me versus you. I have to win and you have to lose. But with these deliberations, it's much more dialogue-focused, more a conversation centered around respect and charity, as opposed to hostility and aggression.
Really learning how to hear someone else out, listen to their entire point of view, and then maybe making your point of view in a respectful way.
Of course, yes.
Not only will the youth benefit, but the extension agents will benefit from this process, the community as well. What are some of the things that they may gain from this?
One really big thing that we try to strive for is not just vitalizing youth leadership in a community, but also the partnerships that K-State Research and Extension has been hoping to foster throughout the state. And by connecting them through our state 4-H program, they're able to really get a centralized resource for them to reach out and grab some of these trainings and some of this curriculum for them to adapt in their own style. So it gives them more options in terms of how they want to address leadership concerning civic engagement.
And if somebody wants to tackle this, they want to take this on, they want to either learn to become a facilitator or get something set up for their community, how do they do that?
You can either email me at jordancr@ksu.edu, jordancr@ksu.edu, or, of course, you can contact our State 4-H office and they'll be able to redirect you. Whoever you may be, you don't have to be an extension agent. Like I said, any community organization can really get in on this. It's not just exclusive to Research and Extension or 4-H. It's open to anybody who's willing to have a conversation.
That's Chase Jordan, Assistant Project Coordinator for the 4-H Community Vitality Team. Jackie Hernandez is the Project Coordinator. They're both students at Kansas State. For more information, visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for the Monday edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.